124 Spider Review. From 28,825 pounds. 8. Introduction. Last year we saluted Fiat for the canny reasoning that resulted in the 124 Spider, its first rear-drive sports car since the original model was discontinued in the early 1980s. Although the amalgamation of Mazda MX-5 mechanicals and Italian styling was not a flawless integration by any means, it delivered the kind of desirable product that was so obviously missing from Fiat's limited and conventional lineup. However, to Abarth, Fiat's feisty tuning division, the 124 is of arguably much greater import, where its parent, through minimal investment of resource, gained a useful image bump, particularly in the US, and a very decent roadster. Abarth gets the chance to apply its underused talents to an already admirably talented piece of kit, a dramatic shift from its current norm of operating the Fiat 500's modest abilities. The fact that there is also a manifest gap in the market for Abarth's version does it no harm, either. Mazda is famously conservative when it comes to boosting the MX-5's power, and although the Spider doesn't dramatically increase its established output, the 36 pounds-foot of additional peak torque, and a much greater dose of it at lower revs, of course, supplied by the turbocharged 1.4-liter multi-air engine, then promises to be significant in a car that weighs not much more than a ton. Furthermore, by returning mechanical limited slip differential denied to the cooking versions of the 124 Spider, Abarth has been allowed to set out its stall. This looks like an authentically sporting sort of Spider, and potentially the small Italian roadster we've been waiting for since long before the misconceived Fiat Barcado was axed. Certainly, it will need to be if Fiat is to justify the asking price. Starting at £29,565, the Abarth is almost £6,000 pricier than a top-spec MX-5. Those are fancy, feel-some boots to fill, but the payoff ought to be the best Scorpion badge wearer since the Auto Bianchi A112 Abarth of the mid-1970s. Design and styling. Naturally, the Abarth shares its major body panels with Fiat's version of the Spider, although that hasn't prevented easy differentiation between the two. In large part, that's because of the tuner's racing anti-glare kit, which is a splendidly facetious description for the matte black treatment enacted on the 124's long bonnet. This signals its maker's sentimental awareness of recent history and places the car in homage-like context, but there's more besides. The car's aggressive front bumper has been significantly redesigned to accommodate larger air intakes, and the rear has a record Monza quad exhaust to go with further scoops in the paneling. The pipes are connected to the same turbocharged 1.4-liter multi-air engine as in the Fiat 124 Spider, albeit in a heightened state of tune here. The previously modest 138 bhp at 5,000 revolutions per minute wound up to 168 bhp at 5,500 revolutions per minute. That's slightly more than is developed by Mazda's naturally aspirated 2.0-liter lump, but it is the heftier peak torque, delivered 2,000 revolutions per minute sooner, that distinguishes the Italian four-cylinder unit from its Japanese opposite. Beyond the engine bay, the Abarth probably shares more mechanical components with the equivalent MX-5 than its Fiat sibling. Like Mazda's most expensive variant, the Abarth gets the Bilstein dampers and rear limited slip differential not available on the cooking model, although the front double wishbone and rear multi-link suspension are standard throughout both ranges. As you might expect, the specific chassis tune is Abarth's own, and its 124 gains stiffened anti-roll bars and a higher specification of Bridgestone Potenza tire than Fiat's Spider. As Touran's engineers did, Abarth claims to have maintained the MX-5's perfect 50-50 weight distribution despite having the same longer nose and weightier engine as the cheaper 124 Spider. We didn't have a chance to check that weight distribution, but we'd be mildly surprised if it didn't replicate the 55-45 spread recorded by the Fiat. We also haven't yet driven the 6-speed Sequenzial Sportivo automatic in the UK. The auto is popular overseas, although our experience suggests that the short-throw standard manual gearbox, tested here, is the smarter investment. Interior. After the noticeable changes to the 124's bodywork, it's a little disconcerting to find the 124's cabin so dependent on smoke and mirrors for a sense of identity. The feeling is by now a familiar one. We experienced it in Fiat's version of this car, and no one with knowledge of the MX-5 could fail to spot the wholesale carryover of Mazda's architecture. Whether or not this is a problem is wholly subjective, though, because, objectively, at least, the interior remains a dainty and very dapper masterstroke. You sit splendidly low, everything around you aesthetically pleasing and well put together, and aside from the fact that you unwittingly click the infotainment controller down with your left elbow and there's almost nowhere to put anything, it's all beautifully organized, especially when you take the car's diminutive size into account. Abarth's embellishments are, if anything, even milder than those enacted by Fiat. Most notably, you get the Scorpion badge, a larger edition number plaque, a vividly red rev counter and a button to engage sport mode. Otherwise, it's mostly just trim materials that have changed, but these are very well handled, especially with regard to the leather sports seats and Alcantara trim of our test car. Whether or not a smattering of gratifyingly tactile surfaces goes any further to justifying the Abarth's substantial premium is debatable, but, to our testers, they did produce a measurable upswing in appreciation for the surroundings compared with those of the Fiat 124. Not bad for smoke and mirrors. The screen and its controller are unaltered from their deployment in the Fiat 124 Spider, which means they're essentially no different from the infotainment that features in the Mazda MX-5. As with the rest of the interior, this is both an advantage. The Mazda system is fundamentally very decent, and a disadvantage. It's plainly another manufacturer's setup with an Abarth badge stuck on the front. For our money, we'd take Mazda's tech over Fiat's equivalent anyway, especially as it comes fully stocked with sat-nav, DAB tuner, Bluetooth and rear-view camera. Granted, if you felt minded to complain about Touran's failure to even tweak the on-screen menu to include its own interface, we wouldn't blame you. But if you can make your peace with the 124's carried-over cabin, chances are the infotainment's similarities won't upset you too much. Our test car had the upgraded Bose stereo, which increases the speaker count and includes a subwoofer, too. Given the inevitable fight against wind noise, we'd recommend it. Performance. The Abarth 124 announces its presence in slightly curious and flatulent tones through those quad pipes. It brings to mind the kind of exhaust note that has become common in large, empty retail development car parks late at night and normally emanates from an overly ambitious back box on an insufficiently ambitious modified hatchback. Put simply, the 124 is a little too keen to sound menacing around idle and at low speeds. But at least that sonic keenness prepares you for the stiffer, simpler and more direct driving experience that this car provides than its immediate relations. There's no denying the difference a turbocharger makes to a relatively light sports car. It's not massive when measured on benchmark 0 to 60 miles per hour acceleration. The Abarth manages the sprint in 6.8 seconds, and Mazda's claim for a 158 bhp atmospheric MX-5 is 7.3 seconds, to 62 miles per hour. But look instead at in-gear acceleration, which is so much more indicative of real-world pace. The 124 Spider needs just 8.3 seconds to get from 30 miles per hour to 70 miles per hour in 4th gear, and that's quite punchy. An Audi TT 2.0 TFSI Coupe needs 8.0 seconds, and a normally aspirated Toyota GT86 requires almost 12 seconds. So the Abarth 124 Spider can certainly pick up pace just when you want it to. Where an MX-5 needs revs, and spins memorably between 5,000 revolutions per minute and 7,000 revolutions per minute, the 124 will knuckle down from just 2,500 revolutions per minute and also do it pretty responsively. Abarth's engine does seem that highly strung, apparently breathing quite easily under the bonnet, and doesn't feel as soft under the accelerator pedal as the more roary examples of the Abarth 500 can. It also races on with much more gusto at high revs than the Fiat 124's engine does, and that makes all the difference to how much more you can enjoy this car quickly than you might the Fiat. The Abarth doesn't start hinting that it needs another gear until you're up at 5,500 revolutions per minute, whereas the Fiat starts its asthmatic routine about 1,000 revolutions per minute earlier. It's clear that the advantages the Abarth 124 offers over its Mazda sibling come with some compromises. The Abarth feels notably quicker and more meaningfully responsive than the Mazda in give-and-take driving, and its gear shift quality, excellent, and brakes, strong, are identical to its sister cars. However, the Abarth doesn't reward really spirited driving like the Mazda. It doesn't sound as sweet, and the presence of that turbo just takes the edge off the considerable pleasure to be taken in rowing precisely through the Mazda's gearbox and being able to perfectly match the rotational speeds of the car's engine and prop shaft without really thinking about it. Ride and handling. Firmer, flatter, noisier, more straightforward, and perhaps a touch more accessible and instantly compelling, although also a bit less likely to hold your attention over the long term. That's how you'd characterize the driving experience of the Abarth 124 Spider to an MX-5 owner who was intrigued enough to wonder what an Italian factory tuner might make of his or her favorite two-seater. It's the suspension's firmness, the added jostle and fidget to the car's ride, that you notice first. Over gentler bumps at higher speeds, the Abarth feels pretty supple, but the difference in the compression settings of its dampers between low and high-frequency inputs is stark. Over broken surfaces and sharp edges, the Abarth's suspension feels quite coarse and wooden. The forces the suspension can transmit into a body structure that seldom shows the slightest sign of stress in other applications are enough to set up noticeable shudder and shake from the scuttle at times here. So what's the payback? Well, the Abarth has excellent hunkered-down body control and very smart handling response, as well as stronger outright grip levels than any factory-produced MX-5, which would make it usefully quicker than the Mazda around a lap of a circuit. It also offers more accessible rear-wheel drive handling adjustability than either its Mazda or Fiat sibling thanks to all that torque at medium revs, and the addition of the limited slip differential. Despite the higher grip level we've already mentioned, the Abarth's torque is enough to overwhelm its rear tires even at middling revs, provided that you time your inputs just so. And that makes the Abarth 124 Spider a more amusing thing to drive in places and situations that wouldn't unlock the real brilliance of an MX-5. On the flip side, there's a relative shortage of delicacy and progressiveness about the Abarth 124 compared with the Mazda, the MX-5 simply communicating and encouraging that bit more vividly. But plenty of people might be willing to trade a bit of delicacy for directness here, particularly because you don't have to be willing to trade all of it. The 124 Spider and MX-5 possess similar standing start acceleration abilities, but the Abarth has grip and pace on a circuit that would give it an advantage over an equivalent Mazda that could probably be measured in whole seconds. The Abarth is held much more level than the Mazda thanks to its firmer, shorter suspension springing. It means the 124 Spider maintains a more secure and robust grip level, works its contact patches more evenly and simply carries greater speed. The car's electronic stability control makes it very easy to drive on the limit and prevents the rear from stepping out of line quite subtly if you leave it on. Turn it off and you'll find the car takes attitude more quickly than the Mazda does, although this is still a car that indulges and forgives very sweetly. The Abarth's traction is quite easily flustered at the rear axle by bumps. MPG and running costs. Fiat's inflated opinion of the 124's superiority compared with the MX-5 did it no favors last year when we judged its value for money. Turin's preference for comparatively high sticker prices certainly does not abate in the Abarth, and the fact that the car, like its siblings, is built in Japan is unlikely to encourage any future slashing of the £29,565 starting cost. To its credit, the new model's additional features and its idiosyncratic performance do a better job of distancing the Abarth from the MX-5 than its Fiat sibling, although the slower Mazda is equally well equipped. In terms of running costs, there isn't a spectacular amount of difference between the two. Turbocharging and a smaller capacity engine mean the Abarth emits 148 grams/km to the Mazda's 161 grams/km, which, under April's new scheme, translates into a £300 saving in the first year for the Abarth owner, but after that, you'll pay the £140 standard rate on both. The 124 marginally wins out for official combined fuel economy, too. Its maker claims 44.1 miles per gallon to Mazda's 40.9 miles per gallon. With true MPG testing unavailable, we recorded an admirable 45.2 miles per gallon at a steady cruise and 35.4 miles per gallon over the full test. Not bad, but not distant enough from our previous experience with the MX-5 to be a telling advantage. Verdict: good. No nonsense turbo pace. High grip levels. Good body control. Accessible handling balance. Bad. Handling lacks fluency and progressiveness. Not as rounded as Mazda's sister car. Gauche looks and soundtrack make it a niche choice. The Abarth 124 Spider is what you might call a bit of a giggle. Most Mazda MX-5 owners would have a lot of fun in one for an afternoon, we suspect, but then would probably be quite happy to swap their car keys back. Compared with the Japanese sporting icon from which it is sprung, it is a little noisy, harsh, gauche and trying. But the Abarth 124 Spider is far from a failure. Abarth's mission with this car must rightly have been to claim territory that the Mazda has never managed to secure, to convince petrolheads that a cloth-top two-seater could feel as focused and hardcore as a really specialized £30,000 hot hatchback. In that mission, the Abarth does remarkably well. This 124 Spider is more of a niche proposition than its Fiat or Mazda sister cars. You can understand why Mazda has never explored this tangent itself, given how hard this car's suspension seems to make its body structure work at times. But it's a sports car that gives up its dynamic entertainment